Welcome to Digra India's podcast series. This is an ongoing podcast series from the Game Studies India Adda podcast series that we used to have. And this is our very first ever Digra India, first ever podcast as Digra India. So, we are extremely proud and honored to welcome Yadu Rajiv, who is a veteran game designer in the Indian kind of scenario. Well, I've had the kind of honor and good fortune to know Yadu for a while and be an admirer of his work. And how I came to know Yadu was at a random meeting of game designers, but then through a fantastic game that he made called Circulets, which I still play on my mobile. So Yadu Rajiv is a game designer, developer, curator, and evangelist for independent games, and he co-founded Hashtash in 2011, where he designed and developed multiple games. But he's also a scholar and a teacher, and he's taught for a while at Srishti Institute of Art and Design in Bangalore for about 5 years, and he has recently joined Baiju in 2020, where he's been building and supporting game design and educational games. But Yadu, you can add to that if I've missed out anything there. Uh, we are so honored to welcome you to our Digra India podcast.
Thank you
And
so much. It's an honor to be here, and I didn't know that was the first, but it's happy to be uh, kind of taking part in this podcast, and I'm kind of glad to be the first to kind of kick things off as well.
yeah, so we have had podcasts, quite a few podcasts before this, but as Digra India, it is our very first
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
And just to introduce ourselves, today with Yadu, we have myself. I'm Shobik Mukherjee, Dr. Shobik Mukherjee. I work on video games, storytelling. I'm a games researcher, and we have Jeffrey Fernandez, who is uh, a young game researcher who is doing his PhD at IIT Roorkee. So, well, so I just want to kind of hand over to Jeffrey for a brief introduction to Digra India, and then we can start off with the interview.
Uh, Hello all. So we basically started this podcast series as Game Studies India, which was a like an informal sort of group of game researchers who we like got to know from like various sources, and we together decided like we need to like do something about the game studies in India, where we wanted to promote this kind of research and like make people aware that such kind of opportunities also exist. And most recently, we basically leveled up, and we are now the Indian chapter of the Digital Games Research Association, which is one of the premier bodies of game research globally. So now, under the DIGA umbrella, we basically again just want to do the same thing, that is promote game studies research all over India. And the podcast series is an effort to sort of contribute to that.
And also to link up with kind of both the industry and the research game culture scenario as well, I think. So thank you so much, Jeffrey and Yadu. So I was just wondering if we could start off with kind of asking you something that I've asked you earlier as well. How did you get into games research? Sorry, how did you get into games research and games design? Uh, and and uh, I believe you started as an English honor student, or I think in the humanities, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
how did you? Yeah, that's a strange translation. So how did it all happen?
So it's strange because it's I have to kind of go back even probably even way before. Like I don't know if anybody wants to hear all this, but
Yes, we do.
okay. So it's I think when I was young, I the first game I kind of encountered, we used to play a lot of brick games and all of these handheld devices, which were kind of like around at that point of time. Like I think you might have seen the old Space Invaders kind of like handheld thingies and all that. So there was a lot of game playing that used to happen when I was like really young, when I was in high school, like when not even high school, actually way before high school, and which kind of led me to kind of force my parents to buy me an old knockoff, Russian knockoff called Dandy of a Nintendo, like an 8-bit system. So I mean, I'll just kind of try to compress a lot of things that happened at that point so that I don't just keep on talking forever. Uh, um, I had a lot of friends who had different consoles at that point, and I kind of, again, we generally influenced all parents to buy us different kinds of consoles. And I like at that point of time, I had actually, when I was in like fifth or sixth or something, I had already played like on an Atari. The there was a there was a game console called Sega Mega Drive,
Yes.
and yeah, so it was like like we exchanged a Mega Drive to play on an Atari. So yeah, that's something that kind of started at like I kind of took my consoles and gave it to other people at so that they could play at their houses, and we would take other people's consoles so that we could play. So they kind of started exchanging consoles and all that. So and kind of got introduced to like Game Boys, and this was like way before PlayStation kind of showed up. So at that point, we were learning kind of basic in Q basic in school actually, and like a bunch of us really wanted to kind of had this idea of like, oh, we were watching a lot of cartoons, and we were like, I wanted to make a game like Mappy, and so we were again like influenced by a lot of games that we were playing at that point. So essentially, there were like three or four of us who really wanted to make games. Like when we were in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth
What
kind of.
year was this, Yadu? I'm just kind of curious.
I think it was 96 or something.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Q Basic would have been the thing then.
yeah, yeah, and I we tried to do stuff, but like failed terribly. But sort of like in my conscience, like I had this thing about making games, kind of embedded at that point of time. And later, I moved. My dad, both my parents were kind of academics. They write poetry. My dad is a philosopher, a critic. My mom does art history and writes poems. It like my brother does music. So interestingly, it was like a creative household as well. And so we keep listening to music and all blah blah blah. So all those things kind of happen along the way, and read a lot of stuff as well. So reading and music and kind of this culture of like watching films and being influenced by what was happening in Kerala at that point of time also. There was like a cultural revival that was kind of happening. I can't remember much about it. I think my like dad would be a better person to kind of explain what was going on. But like generally, it was like a kind of a very charged kind of a space and atmosphere. We moved down so at some point, and my brother, like I was playing. My brother got a PC, and he sort of suggested that I do something useful with it rather than play games all day long. I was playing Age of Empires and Road Rash at that point. I think that was like in, and we could get these PC Quest CDs and all that at that point. This was, I think, uh, early 97, 98, I guess. And um, uh, actually, probably before that. But, anyways, I kind of started to kind of, I went to a place, learned a bit of HTML and CSS at that point of whatever it was like early days, and some JavaScript, and I got introduced to Flash at that point. It was Macromedia Flash, early days of Flash. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, and yeah, and then my brother had a book on VB5, Visual Basic 5, and I was like, sure, like I mean, he was like, why don't you like kind of figure this out? And I just kind of put myself into the book, and I kind of started learning about Visual Basic. uh, Internet was kind of scarce at that point. You had to kind of go to an internet cafe or something to kind of do stuff. My parents wouldn't like really invest in dial-up at that point. And I mean, I was trying to convince them, but it was very difficult and it was expensive, like really expensive at that point. So I would go to internet cafes. ICQ was a thing back then.
Yes,
um,
I remember.
yeah. So interesting enough, Yahoo had a chat back then. The Yahoo Messenger app had a chat and had chat rooms. One of the chat rooms was programming, and like it was just called Programming One, Programming Two, and stuff like that. So I was like hanging out in Programming Two all the time, and I also kind of made friends on ICQ strangely somehow. Some real like some German friends uh, who were all into programming. It's all kind of grew from that. So group of people, and they were all into game kind of things. So at that point, we were trying to, at least I was trying to kind of figure out how to kind of do graphics programming on my PC at that point, and trying to figure out like what OpenGL was, what DirectX is, and whatever middleware that was freely available at that point, or kind of free-ish versions of all these things. Like we couldn't get access to anything. I didn't really understand most of it, so it was a bit of an uphill climb to sort of figure out what all these. I mean, I think there were only like this the old Nihi tutorials, or and there was one more. I forget right now, but like there were a bunch of DirectX tutorials also, which kind of got you going, like how to draw a rectangle on the screen, how to light it, how to texture it, and how to make it a cube, how to texture the cube, and then so on and so forth, and then loading 3ds like obj files, or like it just kind of was like rudimentary stuff that you as a game person you wouldn't probably want to kind of go through at this point, unless you're focused on like engine architecture or programming or something. You don't necessarily bother with those. But kind of my things started from there, and eventually I kind of picked up Flash more or less. Like I kind of didn't go heavy into the. I did pick up like C++ and did a lot of work in Visual Basic at that point, but kind of eventually moved into Flash because it was more visual and animation kind of focused. And at that point, I thought like I had finished like kind of 12th, and this was around I guess 2002 or something. And uh, so my thing was like I didn't really I would kind of did bio maths in school, but I was like not necessarily interested in, in either of those. I should have taken up computers for some reason. I ended up doing bio math and not computers. And I'm sure it had something to do with my marks at that point, but uh, but generally, that kind of at that point I was like, yeah, I don't really care about engineering and figuring out to how to become a doctor or something. And I was kind of keen. I was doing all this programming and like web stuff at that point, and also invested in like Photoshop and graphics and all this kind of things, like heavily influenced and heavily kind of focused on all these things. And I was like I need to kind of figure out how to make games on my own. And at that point, there was hardly anybody. I mean, if to name a studio, I remember I remember Tiger Tail. I remember Dhruva in some
Yes.
shape. Yeah,
India
and
game?
India Games was there, I guess, at that point. But
Yes.
it was they were all huge websites doing different things, and I think a lot of them were also doing mobile Java based stuff. And
Yes.
I was not a Java person. I'm not a Java person at all. So I mean now, I mean I guess I am a bit more of a Java person because of C Sharp, I guess. But sure.
Yes.
But so interestingly, what has like I have kind of like I thought getting into phones was going to be difficult because now I needed to learn Java, and that kind of was a huge kind of a detriment. I didn't like the idea of learning a new language at that point, which had so much bells and whistles, and it it was just not easy to do. Like JavaScript and ActionScript was just easy, and Visual Basic kind of I think did something wrong to me because it was like it was one of the most easiest things to get in
Yes.
like it was visual. Like you could create a form, you could create a button, double click on it, and then you had the event for it. So it was like kind of, it just made sense a lot. And then here you were trying to figure out, like, I don't think I ever understood the Java route at that point, so I never went that way. And I thought, so all these companies doing Java stuff, I didn't want to do applets and all that. Was not something I was keen on. I was like hoping that Flash would have become a thing at that point, and it did eventually. Um, Tiger Tail, India Games, Dhruva, Raptor Entertainment was an interesting company that I was looking at because they were trying to build an engine and all that. Interestingly enough, uh, Joel was working there, I think,
Really?
partly at that point. It's so interesting. It's so interesting that this industry is extremely small. That like there are people I've met on. I remember like we were part of an early you Yahoo group where I remember exchanging information and talking about stuff. I think if you dig up the archives, you can still find them. And I eventually, in 2011, end up meeting the same person. I'm like, we've spoken before. Like I know, like a, it's like, and I was talking about this group in Yahoo, and he was like, yeah, I was also part of it. I'm like, you are Gautam, and I'm like, yes. I'm like, oh, and it's so it's so strange how kind of weirdly small this space is. So all of that kind of led. I thought maybe it will be interesting to kind of take a break, and I really thought that kind of learning, and I was really good at English at that point. Interestingly, I had a couple of friends who were non-Indian who were in school with me, and like I was really good at talking in English, and kind of like the and kind of my command on the language was also not really bad at that point for a high school student. And I thought maybe it'll be interesting to kind of focus heavily on English and like heavy on kind of a. At that point, I thought games were heavily narrative driven, or that's what I kind of thought. Like I didn't have a vocabulary at that point about to talk about mechanics and things like that. But I knew like what these things were, but didn't have a language for them. But I kind of thought of it as like story driven things. Um, which would later kind of change in different forms. But at that point, I was like, yeah, so learning English or kind of it would be an interesting space to be in creatively. And at the same time, I assumed that I would get more time to make games, which was hardly the case. I don't know if anybody, like, if anyone goes to college, they would know, like, there are enough and more distractions there.
Of course.
And and then there's the actual coursework. I was heavily involved in many things in college. Interestingly, I got super distracted by the film club. We were doing a lot of things. There was a film studies course also, which kind of greatly influenced me. And there are a lot of people who came from the film fraternity also who were around in campus, who kind of shook me and kind of took me off course for a while I was writing screenplays and stuff. So it was kind of an interesting kind of a thing. But the games thing did not happen because I didn't have a machine at that point, and it was all in the air. Till later, I would kind of take a decision to kind of, I like my goal was like, how do you get into this industry? And I didn't know anybody at that point, and all the people I mailed to kind of never responded back. So at that point, I was like, maybe the best way is to kind of go the visual kind of a route. So my first thing was to like I like my brother was in Delhi at that point, and I was like, I will join a MAC, like this Maya Academy of Arts
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, let me join like one of these courses, and then I will take the art route. I was fiddling around with like visual stuff, anyways. I mean, I was really good at Flash and Photoshop, and I knew a bunch of like Maya at that point, and I was also like a programmer, like weirdly self-taught. So kind of uh, that didn't work. I kind of went there, paid some money, and never went to do the course. I interestingly became like I like all the money that I kind of took with me to Delhi to live off, and that I kind of that all that money got over, and then I had to kind of find a job at that point after right after college. I was like, I since I was good at English or speaking English at that point, my first thing was like I'll join a call center. At least it'll kind of help pay the bills. So my first job there was basically um, to kind of be a part of a voice process for IBM Daksh, and it's so strange talking about this now. But I did a bunch of freelance stuff there. So
Okay.
yeah, so on the side, I was kind of trying to do some side hustle on like game like things. That is where I kind of met like really did bad work actually at some point for some people. I met Nalin at that point. I don't know if you remember Nalin
Of
Savara
course,
from
Nabil Nain Savara.
you might have, yeah. So met Nalin there. Met a good friend through IBM Daksh, whose name is Bhupinder. And interestingly, through Bhupi, Bhupinder and a couple of other friends are working. They were trying to make an this is absurd, but they were trying to make this is the most weird stories that I have. Like they were trying to actually make a like a CD for their college. They were at that college, a college called FMS, I think at that point. So so they wanted to make a CD for a festival. Like they had a college fest or something, and they wanted to give a CD. So I was good at Flash, and my friend is like, "You're good at Flash. Why don't you make a CD for us, which is like an auto run CD? You know, like when you put
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
CD."
yeah. There will be an
It's
UX
such an
coding.
archaic thing now to
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about, which I don't even have a CD drive on my laptop. So it's how archaic that has become. So it's like an auto run CD that you when you put in, it automatically runs and then it shows you a fancy interface. So I was supposed to make one. It was all in 3D and rotating and fancy stuff. So interestingly, uh, that friend who kind of outsourced that work from the FMS college to a company called Subodh at that point was run by Kinshuk.
Okay.
And that's how I meet Kinshuk for the first time. And I'm like, oh, hello, Kinshuk. Like, what's going on? So interestingly, that's how I kind of. I think it was 2000, like 2000. I don't remember exactly.
So,
2000.
just for the listeners and for Jeffrey, who might not have known King Shook, King Shook is also a member of Hashtag Yadu, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
he's the other co-founder. I mean, one of the other
Co-founder.
co-founders. Like we are a bunch of people actually who started it, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, Kinshuk still runs it.
yeah.
I mean, most of us have kind of left for other places and other things, but Kinshuk still runs Hash, and it's still going strong. So yeah, so it's been a kind of a wild. So yeah, that's how I kind of then eventually me and Kinshuk kind of catch up beyond all that point. I find that he's also interested in making games. I am on DeviantArt. He's on DeviantArt. We both write poetry and all this nonsense. At that point, it seems so weird now. Like so many of these like small things. Like he used to write songs and he still probably does. I guess I don't know. I haven't asked him. But like he used to write like poetry and songs, and I used to write like stories, and so we would exchange all these, and then we would have kind of long conversations about what kind of games do we want to make, and we would just like design sort of stuff on the go, like whenever we could catch up. And I remember long taxi rides where we just like designing stuff in our heads and stories and stuff. And we both got involved in a bunch of open source projects at that point. Kinshuk more than I actually, um, which leads to sort of my kind of second, like I mean I did a bunch of stuff there in Delhi in between. Like I taught in an app tech in an arena, um, because I was kind of interestingly enough, that's also another place where I met an interesting other person, an artist called Shiraj Talang. So like all these people have kind of eventually, interestingly, all that I met along the way have kind of fallen or come back full circle and still in the industry, which is kind of strange as well as interesting. So my second job as a UX person in a company in Delhi, which focuses on open source products or products based on open source software. That's Kinshuk and I kind of work together there, and then eventually leave that company to form Hashdash. And at the same time, it is also when that we've worked on a bunch of open source festivals and community meetups and stuff, which basically kind of gives us the idea of how to sort of figure out, like at that point we were like trying to desperately find people in the games community back in like 2008. And I was back in Delhi and working with him, and at that point is when sort of we were saying that we should start something for the open source space, not the open source, the game space, just like we are doing with the open source, communities. We were kind of we were basically just talking to all these people around in Delhi and trying to figure out whether there was people interested in making games. And so that's how we kind of did our sort of first game jam, which was the BYOG, and it also kind of gave birth to what is now GameDev.in, but it was called Indie Game Dev India at that point, because we called all ourselves, we all thought of ourselves as indies at that point, kind of still do, I guess. But so yeah, so that's kind of the birth of the community stuff that has happened across all these years, as well as my kind of foray into games, from all the other stuff that, yeah, I kind of hope makes some sense.
This is extremely valuable stuff, Yadu. To actually, it's like actually like a little history book of games in India. I mean, the game development. And I had a follow-up question, but I'll keep it very short, which
Mhm.
is that a couple of comments actually, because when you mentioned Sega Mega Drive and Atari, these were not very well kind of like they were not available in India really. I mean,
I know this. I
yeah,
don't at that point. Like these were all like those couple of people that I kind of got these machines from were slightly kind of well-off families, kids whose parents were abroad or something. And
that's
I saw the Mega Drive actually in an Archie comic, and
oh.
I'm like, look, an ad for a Sega Mega Drive, and you could play Aero the Acrobat on it, and I'm like, and then you could play Mortal Kombat on it. I'm like, this is an interesting console. This looks better than what we have. So I was like, I kind of basically said, "Ki, like, I was sort of like the influencer that I told my friend that ask for this for your next birthday, or when your dad is coming to visit from the Gulf." Uh, so eventually, that's how we kind of got it. We also destroyed a TV while playing it. Also, yeah, did so many things.
How interesting. I mean, because this is I mean, I was just kind of, because I've been writing on this, and these are things that I'm kind of getting from people that they when India at that time, it was under the license Raj, so it would be so difficult to get anything really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're playing on. But I mean, I also have very similar experiences on QBasic, with QBasic, and then later VB. But yeah, so I also wanted to tell our listeners that I've actually come across a poem translated by Yadu on video games. And I called him up at 9:30 the night when I found it, because I wanted to figure out whether this was the same person, and it was really. So Yadu has, as you can all figure out, he has multiple talents really going. But I was also before we go and and kind of ask more about kind of Yadu's current work. I know, Jeffrey. Do you have any questions? Jeffrey, do you want to chime in now with some questions that you had? Then we can.
Well, I think those questions would be like better. Like it would be better to ask them once we talk more about like Yadu's current work,
Very
because
well.
that will tie in well.
Then let us ask Yadu about what he's doing at the moment. Yadu, so if you can bring us, I mean, that was really nice. And now if you can tell us, as in what you have been doing recently, what you are up to at the moment, and what you're looking at making, and these kinds of things. Uh,
Okay. So, like you said, like I mean, like yeah, I guess humble brag is like, yes, multiple talents but lack focus.
but also tell us about your podcast series, because I mean,
Yeah.
it's an
Oh,
excellent
yeah. So,
podcast
so
there.
I think at the moment, like my life is kind of divided between, sort of, as in like the work kind of life is divided between what I do at work in Byju's, and what we are trying to do for the last since the pandemic. Actually, kind of we've kind of doubled down on what we are trying to do with GameDev.in. GameDev.in sort of uh, it I don't we still haven't sort of figured out what exactly it is. We kind of know it is a community of people who are sort of like-minded and have similar things in mind, and they all play and make games, uh, and would like to help each other sort of somehow, um, kind of get through and probably rise up and make better and better and great games out of India as well. We never really, I mean, it is called GameDev.in, I guess. So I guess the focus has always kind of been on the local and India as kind of a whole. It also is because like it kind of started as like a grassroots kind of a thing where it kind of happened between a bunch of developers and people in Delhi, Noida, and then later when I moved to Bangalore, met a bunch of people here. So it became like a um, it kind of grew, and then eventually meeting more people across through the India GDC. At that point, it was National GDC, but yeah. So all of that kind of shaped this community as to what it is right now. Um, my games focused work. So I done UX stuff, as in like user experience design for a bunch of time, visual art kind of creative stuff as well, and front end things with along the way, and then focus a bunch of time on teaching. And that teaching time has also been focused on games because the syllabus that we were creating and the courses we were creating were also primarily game design focused courses, and both for the undergraduate and the postgraduate kind of spaces. And then I thought maybe like I can always come back to teaching. It's not such a like a. I mean, I felt like I needed to kind of be doing more at this point of my life, so I wanted to kind of come back. And so, uh, and because I have a kid, she's 7 now, and at that point I was also very interested in making stuff for her, and I was like, uh, like my interests lie in this space where I want to make small game like things. I see her playing a lot of stuff on a tablet and other spaces, and like my kind of I really wanted to kind of make stuff for her primarily. And like interestingly, I had talked to people in Byju's before, and they were into very interesting things at that point. And I thought maybe I can also kind of take a. I mean, it kind of like sort of overlapped with what I was interested at that point, uh, with the kind of games that they were making. And right now, our focus is on making these phygital games, which are partly physical, like a board game, and then partly on like an iPad. So you interact with the digital game through actually manipulating physical, tangible objects in front of the screen, which was like fascinating and like really super interesting for me at that point. And so yeah, so I'm at the moment I am doing these things. I'm juggling between game dev and stuff, which includes a sort of like monthly meetups called Campfire. We do a podcast. We have a blog which we're trying to kind of keep actively running. The podcast is also like sort of the idea behind the podcast is like we want to kind of archive sort of records of people and their histories, and we want to slowly build up sort of this kind of a repository of information, so that it's not lost also, and like interesting stories kind of come up, and you are able to like people who are coming fresh into this industry and space have some sort of a history to kind of see like, hey, we're not like fresh, starting afresh without like a base to stand on. And so yeah, if we're just 2 episodes in, and, and it's too early to like call it all this, but like that is the kind of rationale behind doing the podcast. Yeah, and we have a Discord community which is kind of slightly big, and Yeah, like, so this is what I'm kind of doing right now, like, and I'm also trying to make games on the side as well. Yeah, as well.
So, well, Jeffrey, did you have any? Thank you so much, Yadu. So, Jeffrey, did you have anything to follow up on to ask Yadu or?
Well, it was interesting that you talked about, like, say, in your games that the people who are playing that have to sort of interact with tangible elements.
Hmm.
So, like recently, there has been like a lot of talk about the possibility of gaming to teach culture to people. For
Okay.
example, our prime minister has also talked about like how games should can be made with, say, like the narratives of the game should be depict like Indian stories or like the Indian culture. And this sort of trend is also seen in like many modern AAA games as well as indie games. Like for example, the Assassin's Creed series that borrows a lot from like, say, recently Greek culture or like the Viking culture. And apart from that, in the indie sector, and especially in India, like Raji is one of the games that has been doing that.
Yeah.
So, what do you think are like the possibilities that arise from this, like, and how this sort of idea can be promoted and worked upon in the like our current scenario?
So I think it like we've had this conversation interestingly within the community, and uh, so some of the things I can just kind of pull from that actually to talk about this. I think it like a lot of things work fine, especially uh, myth, because it's already has like a place in everybody's life. So the buy-in from people is probably just easy because they're kind of familiar with all these things. But I feel that kind of low-hanging fruit also, and there are so many more stories which are like rich and diverse that can come from many places in India. Um, it's just a matter of really doubling down. And kind of finding your own voice in a way, and using the medium of games as a way of expressing them. It's just that I think we are still too young as a like a medium, and the users of that medium, that we are not able to sort of um, kind of bend to our will this thing right now, um, so as to kind of make effective, entertaining, creative message making or whatever. Like, say, I feel that it's just a matter of time, I suppose. That we get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a very interesting take on that. So to follow up, like recently we on our Digra channel we got to talk with one of a PhD scholar called Soumya Gupta,
Hmm.
and she was working on like the concepts of how to make like these narratives through VR and stuff. And
Okay.
given again that you're talking about how these the players have to interact with artifacts,
Hmm.
there is also a possibility, say for example, of using these kind of VR or games in like places like museums, for example, where you interact with like say a certain cultural artifact, and then there's a game that explains the context behind how say this certain element was formed. Do you see that potential? Like, you see that there's a potential to use that kind like gaming in that kind of context in India to explain like the backgrounds behind these kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, if it's cultural heritage or or culture, or like in this kind of settings also, like, I mean, I think like forget VR is probably like even harder to do, or harder to do right.
Yeah.
But like I'm saying that even if you sort of see, it's a thin line between an experience designer and a games designer. So for me, I keep kind of going back and forth. So it's a larger thing that people have to kind of think about when you're designing for these kind of things. Like, you're thinking about an experience or of the space. So you need to design the space. You need to design the experience. You need to kind of think about the interactions. So all these needn't be digital also. Like, it can be, something simple as sticking stickers, or someone coming and telling you something, or it could be like play acted, or there are so many ways of uh,
So,
yeah.
is it something like the phygital that you're talking about as well in this case? When you mentioned the physical and the digital,
It can be. So I mean, I've done. There was a serendipity festival in Goa at some point where I had an installation where we had a giant screen, and I had set up a camera which on the top, which nobody could see actually, and people would walk in, and on the screen there would be like a digital representation of themselves. This this whole experience was called Rhizome, and when other people would walk into the space, they would also become these kind of
yeah,
manifestations.
the very Deleuzian, Deleuze Guattari. Yeah,
Subtle hints at it, I guess.
yes.
But and then when you come closer to each other, then you would become a larger body. So you could make large bodies and assimilate other people and all that. So it was like a fun thing to do. I mean, and but I'm saying is that, like, I mean, you could. I mean, it needn't be something like that. It can be something like that, but it's again, it's sort of a one is to think about what they're trying to kind of get across. It doesn't end most of the time. Like when you're playing a game, especially a digital game, your experience starts when you play the game, and when it ends when you kind of finish a game. But whereas, like, if you're thinking about like uh, like a museum, or like a cultural heritage kind of a thing, like I feel that it has to be somewhat longer, lengthier, kind of a larger kind of an experience, extended beyond like many of these realms, like, you know like like um like I think it would be interesting to think about designing alternate reality games, or live action role play and all that kind of. There are so many aspects of like the idea of play and game that you can get kind of involved into these things, that it's not just one point of contact for one person. It's much kind of a larger thing, and you can pretty much, like, that's my opinion, is that you can pretty much do that with almost anything. It can be, it can be teaching things, or it can be teaching about our culture and history and heritage and all that also. So it's just a matter of like sort of how do you call it, it's creating that experience basically for people to kind of be in.
So, I mean, these are all fascinating viewpoints. I don't know if you agree, Jeffrey. If
No, I actually do. Like the experience should be paramount mainly to
uh,
gaming.
So my question is now, this is our final question to wrap up the podcast in the interview, which is, where do you see games in India, and maybe even the subcontinent, if you have any other contacts outside India and Sri Lanka or other Bangladesh, other places. I mean, where do you think the gaming industry, gaming culture, where do you think it is going? We have like so many millions of PUBG downloads, and then of course games are getting banned, and then again coming back again. And when you talk about video games now to the man in the street, it's always these kinds of games. But where do you see us kind of in the near future? What's your take on that?
It's a difficult question, like, um eh, yeah, I it's a bit of a thing that which you probably think about for a bit. uh um
I've just been asked this question this morning, so
no, yeah, so there are many aspects of it, I suppose. Like when you're talking about, uh like, let's say if you're talking about the industry, I think there are lots of new players, and sort of people are kind of willing to invest more money and all that, which we kind of back in 2011 and all that, we there was hardly anybody trying to invest in games, but you kind of see those kind of changes. So There are general changes in the industry as such, and kind of seeing and and being more responsible as well, which is kind of happening slowly. And I have a feeling that those kind of things will have like much more impact in the coming days. Like if like there are a bunch of other things also, like if you think about it, like how consumption is kind of changing with new subscription services and things like that, and how that is going to change our landscape is which could be more interesting, especially to smaller creators who has always kind of received the short end of the stick almost all of this while. uh, and as for, I think it's the trajectory wise, I think it's always kind of on the high. You don't see it stopping, and you see kind of the medium sort of growing and being used for many other things slowly but steadily. I think that's gonna kind of go up and keep on growing. I think lots more tools are going to kind of happen, which will probably democratize even more like content and creation of these kind of things also. Like, I mean, I was kind of jokingly talking to a friend about how down the line we are very sure that there will be systems where you can just have conversations with instead of programming them. Uh, so you can, you can tell systems and they will just generate code for you as well. So I mean, I think like a lot of these things are probably down the line, uh, sooner than later, I suppose. But yeah, I think those all those things would probably, like where you consume and how you consume content to how it is created, it's all going to be affected. And the more and more companies who are going to be like those kind of change makers would probably get more influenced, or kind of more support from people who have like the money and can invest in all that as well, would also be interesting. Yeah, it is a bit of a difficult thing. I think it sort of like requires you to one to sit down and evaluate multiple possible futures and multiple different scenarios to sort of give you a clearer picture, I guess. I don't know if this.
Or maybe a more isometric one.
I see what you did there.
So yeah, so well, thank you so much, Yadu, for this fascinating conversation with Digra India, and we hope we shall be in touch again, and we hope that we shall get some more fantastic games from you to play, and we are all following your podcast series and also the activities of your group. So we put up a link to that in with our podcast as well when we show it. So thanks a lot again from both of us, from Jeffrey and myself,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
yeah, thanks a lot, Yadu.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun conversations, and I got to tell a lot of stories which I've never told anybody before. So at least, hey, there is new content.
We thoroughly enjoyed those stories, and those stories will kind of add to history books on games in India at some point for sure.
Oh no,
I can promise you that.
I don't know if that's good or bad at this point.
Let us leave it to history.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you so much,
thank you
Yadu.
so much.